Final Fantasy VII is one of the most iconic RPGs ever created. Across its celebrated locations, fascinating and endearing characters, and unforgettable story, Final Fantasy VII made an impact on the PlayStation 1 that still rings loudly to this day. I was forever moved after stepping into the world of Gaia for the first time, mesmerized by the vision, story, and immersion the game achieved. To this day, it still remains one of my favorite games of all time. Remaking the title was never going to be easy, as a game of its caliber had so much to live up to. It took Square Enix over 20 years to do it, but ultimately, the original creatives behind Final Fantasy VII came together and decided to tackle the project before anyone else in the company could. In 2015, Final Fantasy VII Remake was unveiled, and I don't think anyone could have guessed just what a wild ride we were in for. Acting as a larger-than-life recreation of the opening hours of Final Fantasy VII, the first title in the Final Fantasy VII Remake project offered incredible character and narrative depth alongside one of the greatest battle systems ever implemented in an RPG. Final Fantasy VII Remake redefined what a remake could be, reimagining the world we have all come to love and the story we hold so dear. After a thrilling and subverting conclusion, we were left with one statement: the unknown journey will continue. Years later, the time has come to continue that journey for PC players. I put over 400 hours into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PlayStation 5, and I've already spent tons of time with the PC release. From the beginning with Rebirth, it was clear that it was larger than anything I'd ever imagined. As I stepped atop the hill overseeing Mount Nebel in the opening sequence of the game, a triumphant rendition of the Final Fantasy VII main theme came in and threw almost every single emotion possible at me. I couldn't believe what I was playing in February 2024, and with the PC release, that's even more true, especially with the upgraded visuals. This was the moment that I knew this wasn't just any other game. Rebirth would be an experience I'd never forget. Picking up directly after the end credits cutscene of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, Cloud and the party are resting in Calm, the nearest settlement outside of Midgar. It's here that you're immediately thrust into a flashback of 5 years ago, taking control of Cloud on a mission with Soldier First Class Sephiroth in Nibelheim. As Cloud tells the story of Sephiroth's fall to the party, you play in the past and see the events unfold for yourself. The Nibelheim flashback immediately sets the stage for the grand adventure to come, with stunning sights and loads of new mechanics not seen in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's clear from the beginning that the journey that lies ahead is not bound by fate. Immediately after finishing the flashback, Tifa and Cloud step away to the rooftop, where she shares her concerns with Cloud's recollection of the past. This conversation never happened in the original Final Fantasy VII, yet it feels like it was there all along. Naturally, there are countless new conversations, changes, and additions to the main story in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Each edition feels so expertly crafted, truly tying together the narrative in ways I never expected. This opening chapter of the game is a delightful reunion. You can feel both the tension of the party and the lingering effects of the escape from Midgar. Leaving Calm, you step into the first major region of the game, the Grasslands. Home to Bill's Chocobo Farm, a wide area of Republic ruins, and gorgeous greenery, the Grasslands is unlike anything I've ever seen in Final Fantasy. That moment stepping into the Grasslands for the very first time was the first moment I experienced the greatest offering of Rebirth, the world. When I first read Tetsuya Nomura's comment about Cloud running through the wilderness in the Final Fantasy VII Remake sequel, My mind immediately crafted ideas of what the world of Gaia would look like reimagined. Leaving Midgar for the very first time in Final Fantasy VII is to this day one of my fondest memories in games. It was remarkable to see a giant world map appear, a whole world begging to be explored. I had sky-high expectations for how the team would deliver this moment, and after stepping into the very first area of the game, it was clear that Rebirth had broken through and transcended any and all expectations I had set for it. It's almost hard to describe just how big this world is. The map is divided up into regions, massive explorable areas with multiple points of interest. Each has an unfathomable amount of locations, sites, and areas to explore. I have played through entire games where the map was as big as just one of Rebirth's regions. They are truly that colossal. The same can be said for each iconic location. Looking from below at Cosmo Canyon or Junon was nothing short of magical. The scale is literally out of this world, and it instantly immersed me into the game. It is almost unbelievable that the development team at Creative Studio One has managed to recreate the scale that was present in 1997's Final Fantasy VII. Once you step foot in a new region, your map will be clouded, practically begging for you to explore the region in its entirety. With so many different objectives to complete, it is incredibly easy to get sidetracked or lost in the moment while exploring. Immediately upon entering the grasslands, I spent well over 10 hours in this region, exploring almost every nook and cranny on the map. Due to this, I encountered different lone farms and their owners, abandoned buildings, and gorgeous scenery. The game wants you to explore. Go find that piece of world intel or see how you can reach that hill in the distance. There are tens of hours worth of gameplay in each region, and I never got tired of the gameplay loop once. Every region is so vast and different with its offerings that I couldn't stop myself from wanting to explore. Rebirth also introduces new mechanics to allow for traversal throughout the world. Right from the opening mission, you'll notice that you can now scale certain walls, climb up ropes, grapple across posts, and so much more. By far, my favorite new feature involving exploration is the new terrain action button. By pressing circle at any time, Cloud can jump over rocks, roll forward, or climb ledges. This opens up movement in a way not possible in Final Fantasy VII Remake. I felt in control of the game, with exploration wide open to observe any areas I chose to go to. Each region challenged my knowledge of these features by combining them together, utilizing them in ways I didn't think of, or even throwing a new mechanic at me. Fundamentally, this completely changed the way I observed and interacted with the environment. Another exciting new way to explore the world involves chocobos. It was great to finally see the Final Fantasy staple make a solid appearance, as they only appeared in Final Fantasy VII Remake as quick travel spots. Mounting a chocobo in Rebirth is a context-sensitive action, so all you need to do is summon yours with R1 and run into it to hop on. The development team has gone above and beyond simply adding chocobos to the game, as each region has a unique breed for you to discover. This makes for region-specific environmental puzzles and a fun new exploration option with each area. You can find mountain chocobos, jungle chocobos, soaring chocobos, and more. There's even a chocobo with the ability to launch you into the air with a jet stream of water in the Nibel region. All kinds of buried treasure are littered throughout the world, and you can dig these up while riding on a chocobo. Tons of fun collectibles are out there, like play arts models of the tiny Bronco or the buggy. You can even customize the gear your chocobo is wearing using golden plumes, which are obtained through repairing the chocobo stops throughout the planet. While you're out there hunting Sephiroth, be sure to pet each baby chocobo you come across. There are new animations for every region, and it's seriously one of the cutest things you'll see in Final Fantasy VII. You can also even pet the chocobo as different characters when you take control of them throughout the game, like Tifa and Gongaga for Chapter 9. As I progressed through the main story and traversed through the different regions, my jaw dropped more times than I could count seeing the sights. The world is beautiful, yet cruel. It's filled with life at every corner, yet there's a consistent reminder of the imminent threat posed by both the Shinra Electric Power Company and Sephiroth. For example, the Corel region features a luscious tropical environment where Costa del Sol resides. Yet, as you head west, the remnants of an exploded reactor in a dried-up desert serve as a reminder of the planet's suffering. This environmental storytelling is like no other. It's beautifully executed and paints the main themes of the game in every area of the adventure. These main themes tie together with the driving force of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, its story. Tasked with hunting down Sephiroth, the party sets out into the world to track the former soldier. Starting from the Nibelheim flashback and ending at the Forgotten Capital, there's a ton of ground to cover, but Rebirth handles it gracefully. Each area plays a key role in the development of both the narrative and its characters, with no moments where I felt like the narrative dragged. It engages you quickly and doesn't let go. Each chapter has key story events that occur. Back on PlayStation 5, my first playthrough of the game ended after 54 hours. In the end, I came away adoring the main story of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Covering such a vital stretch of the original game and juggling so many key story scenes, there was so much on the line to get this right, and it ended up being everything I ever could have dreamed of and more. Iconic sequences like Cave of the Gi and Barrett's showdown with Dyne have enhanced the source material and are more impactful than ever. Massive new sequences have also been added throughout the story, featuring new characters, encounters, and completely new areas of the planet. It's genius, and it wouldn't be possible without the decision to free the story from the shackles of fate. Altogether, Square has crafted a narrative that builds not only off of Final Fantasy VII Remake, but also the original game and the entire compilation. As someone who has experienced the full compilation of Final Fantasy VII multiple times at this point, I was genuinely amazed playing through the narrative. So many references and plot points from these titles have been instilled within Rebirth, allowing for both a deeper exploration of the world and a greater impact on the player. For instance, there's a moment in the story where you meet Dr. Sheeran in North Corel. He is a character from Final Fantasy VII Remake Traces of Two Pasts, a light novel about Tifa and Aerith's past penned by Kazushige Nojima. In that novel, it is revealed that he had previously saved Tifa after her injuries from the Nibelheim incident. This small plot point made the scene of Dr. Sheeran and Tifa's reunion that much more impactful for me. I found countless plot points like this that truthfully enhanced my experience like no other. Once again, every single addition or change feels conscientiously placed to create the ultimate version of the Final Fantasy VII story. Naturally, there's going to be some attention to the ending of the game and everything that happened. I'm not going to comment on any of that here, but what I will tell you is I adore it, and I've made countless videos with our Final Fantasy VII Under the Plate series explaining what I believe happened and what will happen in the future. If you're interested on my take on the narrative and the various pieces of meta commentary that play throughout the game, please check out our Under the Plate series for more. Seriously, I promise you this story is just mind-blowing. Back to Rebirth as a whole, this narrative depth and quality carries over to all of the side content. This time around, quests are all extremely engaging and offer a plethora of unique stories to uncover. Arguably the weakest part of its predecessor, quality side content that builds off the main story shines brightly throughout the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Certain quests had me questioning why they weren't in the main story, and some were hilarious to experience. Each quest is led by Cloud and one other party member, which allows you to get closer to each character and learn more about their past, desires, and feelings. This fits in perfectly with what the development team said is the theme of Rebirth, bonds, and I loved how much focus they put into crafting each of these side missions. The stories of these characters do not end after the main story. Meaningful character development is scattered across each side quest. This new side content quality in Rebirth sets a standard for both its sequel and the medium as a whole. The same can also be said for proto-relics. In each region, 4 separate proto-relic quests await. These quest lines tend to feature some of the wackier scenarios you can find in the game. I found every region's proto-relic scenario to be extremely engaging, as I was never quite sure what to expect. There's a huge surprise tied into these pieces of world intel, so I highly encourage you to track them down and complete them as you play through the story. And hey, who knows, some familiar faces might appear. Speaking of, the biggest incentive by far for exploration is world intel. Early on, you'll reconvene with Chadley, who's by far everyone's favorite AI. He'll grant you access to over 160 different interactive objectives you can complete throughout the game. Rebirth has 8 different categories of world intel, which can all be found in every region. Starting with the Remnawave Towers will reveal all locations of world intel for that region. In some regions, you can just run up these towers and climb a ladder, but others will require you to solve environmental puzzles, such as using a chocobo, jumping off a roof, and more. Every region is unique with new challenges, so things stay fresh despite the categories of world intel remaining the same. You can discover so much about the world and its people with this intel too. Life Springs, for example, reveal in-depth historical data on the past of each major location and region. I had a blast running through each region from top to bottom and discovering all of the objectives that awaited me. More than ever, I feel like I deepened my understanding of this world. These history notes on places like Calm and even the Republic of Junon, which no longer exists, were fascinating to read. By completing all of the world intel in each region, you can develop new materia, unlock new combat simulator opponents, and so much more. New categories of world intel, like excavation sites and proto-relics, can even be unlocked after completing certain world intel objectives. When you're not trekking across the map and searching out pieces of world intel, you might find yourself at one of the game's many cities or areas. Every settlement is brimming with life from top to bottom, with so many activities occurring everywhere. This is immediately noticeable the second you step outside the Calm Inn for the very first time, as you'll see dozens of NPCs walking around, dancing, and even shopping. As I progressed throughout the story, I noticed this more and more. Costa del Sol, for example, was running rampant with tourists when Cloud and the party first arrived. The tropical paradise is home to all sorts of tourist attractions and minigames, creating a sense of realism with a spot you might not expect to find in the world of Final Fantasy VII. The world feels alive, almost like it's living and breathing. This feeling is even further elevated with the return of dozens of characters from Rebirth's predecessor. You'll find essentially every single major NPC from Final Fantasy VII Remake somewhere in the world, venturing out of Midgar for one reason or another. This design decision creates a cohesive world, one that feels like it's alive and experiencing growth alongside you. I caught up with Jules, who opened a new gym near Mount Corel, and competed to remind him why Tifa is the role model for Gaia in terms of ab crunches. Somewhere along the way, I encountered Beck and his bandits up to no good once again. And of course, Johnny made an appearance at Costa del Sol, and somehow there's now multiple Johnnies running all around that I had to find. As you continue to complete quests and push forward in the story, there's no telling who will show up. The more of the compilation that you've experienced, the more you will get out of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There is so much to discover and explore, and it's hard to recall the last direct sequel that I experienced, which built off characters in a similar manner to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Above all else, characters are the heart of Final Fantasy VII. Without them, this story would have no meaning. Final Fantasy VII features some of my favorite characters of all time. Every single member of the party has an incredibly detailed backstory with relatable motives and inspiring dreams. Final Fantasy VII isn't beloved just for individual characters though. It's the relationships between these characters and how they overcome struggles together that truly sets them apart from the entire video game medium. While Final Fantasy VII Remake laid the groundwork, Rebirth has elevated both characterization and the relationships between each of the party members to the next level. As you venture into the world, Cloud begins to open up and have more vulnerable conversations with the members of the party. This is especially true for his relationship with Tifa, which has blossomed within Rebirth. There are so many moments between the two that have set an unbelievably grand stage for the final act of this trilogy. Speaking of Tifa, her past is explored in the game, shining a light on her continued unmatchable compassion and empathy towards all despite everything she's gone through and experienced. We all desire to act with kindness towards others, and Tifa is a shining example of that throughout Rebirth. Her friendship with Aerith is also heavily expanded, with all kinds of banter, laughter, and support between the two. I loved seeing this unfold throughout the game as I watched two characters who struggled with trust in the past learn they could rely on one another. Aerith's cheerful and bright personality shines more than ever as she experiences the world for the very first time. Her love for each of the party members shines so bright, it's unbelievable as you experience the game. Barrett begins to firmly sit in the fatherly role of the party, protecting those around him at all costs, even despite the trauma he himself faces. Red 13 opens up to the party and reveals his inner child, learning to trust those around him. Yuffie joins the party just around halfway into the game, bringing hilarious moments of teasing and mischievousness to Cloud and a few of the other party members. She is selfish and plenty immature at times, but she empathizes with the party by the end, at last giving everyone's favorite ninja some actual character development. And finally, the jolly Cait Sith has plenty of riddles to share with a suspicious amount of knowledge. You can count on this cat to be there at the lowest and highest peaks of emotion. I could spend hours talking about all of the development each character received, but I'll leave that for you to experience in your own playthrough. It's worth pointing out that Cid Highwind and Vincent Valentine are also here but have very limited screen time. It's pretty similar to Red 13's appearance in Final Fantasy VII Remake, though much more limited. Neither character appears in combat, only as a non-playable party member throughout the journey. You can experience the first teases of their character arcs through quests, but their involvement in the main narrative is quite limited. It's a worthwhile decision in my opinion. We'll get 2 brand new playable characters in the next title, and that's a huge thing to look forward to. Every party member gets time to shine. Each has a segment in the main story where you take control of that character and act as party leader. These segments never felt forced in the story, yet they gave an opportunity to shine light on specific characters at no cost to the pacing or narrative. Rebirth masterfully balances some seriously grim moments with the bright and cheerful ones. Exploring the pasts of all the characters is beautiful, powerful, and flat-out heartbreaking. I couldn't believe my eyes seeing some of the events each party member went through. However, you're able to see the lessons they learned through those times and the motivations they chose to carry with them to become the people we know them as today. You're able to see their growth, will, and determination to make the world a better place. I came away from Rebirth more fascinated and inspired by Final Fantasy VII's characters than ever. This quality development even extends to the side characters, as each of these characters is experiencing their own journey while Cloud and the party track down Sephiroth. Since you reconnect with so many characters from Final Fantasy VII Remake, you get to experience that journey too. Rebirth's characters are simply some of the best in the medium. There's no dancing around it. Very few games have allowed me to connect with so many characters deeply, yet Final Fantasy VII Rebirth balances it all while driving the main story forward, expanding the environment and not losing me for a second of it. The narrative and cutscenes are just the tip of the iceberg for bonds between party members though, as new gameplay elements encourage building strong relationships with one another. This is led by the Bonds of Friendship system, which tracks your relationship status with each of the main party members. This system takes into account your conversation choices, quests undertaken, story beats, and synergy skills to place party members at a certain affinity level. This plays into things throughout the game that could lead to character-specific events in quests and other areas. Of course, one of the events this plays into is the date at the Gold Saucer, and if you're like me, you probably had a character in mind of who you want to be with. And hey, every character in this game is a great choice for the date. We all just have our favorites. In addition to Bonds of Friendship, the other major new system of bond building in the game is through synergy. Each character has both synergy abilities and synergy skills they can utilize with other characters in combat. To utilize a synergy ability, using ATB will fill the synergy gauge. Once two compatible characters have their gauges appropriately filled, you can unleash a devastating flashy combo move. Different abilities have different effects, such as increasing limit levels, gaining unlimited MP for a temporary period, or partitioning your ATB gauge into 3 pieces. Every use will increase the synergy needed to execute that ability, so you must play tactically and be thoughtful with each use. Synergy skills, on the other hand, do not require any ATB and can be executed when guarding. These simpler abilities mostly act as either defensive maneuvers or large offensive attacks. Landing one of these skills can fill the ATB gauge rapidly, and this can change the tide of battle quickly. Experimenting with these abilities and finding out how different pairs of characters fight together is a blast. Some of these abilities are absolutely hilarious, as you can experience anything from Tifa pouncing on the ground with Red 13 to Aerith throwing a pair of shades on with Barret. As you progress throughout the game, you'll be able to unlock new skills and abilities with different pairs of party members. This system was an amazing addition that added even more depth to the already amazing combat system, and I can't wait to see where the team takes it with the final part of the remake trilogy. I can't speak enough about how Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has perfected the combat system from Final Fantasy VII Remake. Blending both action combat and turn-based elements is a huge challenge, but Final Fantasy VII Remake offered a genius blend with the ATB gauge and battle commands. In Rebirth, the combat is everything you remember from the first title in the remake project, but it improved in so many areas you might not realize right away. Battles are still fought in teams of 3. You get 3 new party members over the course of the story: Red 13, Yuffie Kisaragi, and Cait Sith. Naturally, this brings new choices into the equation that can propel your party in different ways. Red 13 is a defensive character with fun new abilities. You can fill his Vengeance gauge to increase your attack power and dodge speed, adding a new layer to his base combat. On the other hand, Yuffie has been tweaked and attacks even faster than she could in Final Fantasy VII Remake Episode Intermission. You can dash away at lightning speeds across the map and attack with her throwing star for chip damage. Throwing the star allows Yuffie to use ninjutsu, which you can change the element's effect of with her abilities. Finally, Cait Sith is loads of fun and retains the luck-based attacks that made him so iconic in the original Final Fantasy VII. You start out alone as the feline robot, with options to summon Fat Moogle with ATB. The two can fight together with Cait Sith riding the Moogle, but can also attack separately to incorporate close and long-range damage together at once. The returning cast has also seen all kinds of improvement. As Cloud, you can now utilize Blade Beam by dodging and immediately hitting square on your controller. This allows for all new strategies when you're up against flying enemies, as you don't need a ranged party member since Cloud can use Blade Beam. Whether you're on the ground or in the air, you can hurl a Blade Beam towards an enemy effortlessly. Speaking of combat in the air, aerial combat overall is much improved. To spring towards an aerial enemy, dodge and immediately press the attack button. Here, you can nail enemies into aerial combos with light attacks or blade beam attacks, utilize certain abilities to knock enemies toward the ground, and more. It's worth noting that aerial combat doesn't quite work for all characters. Cloud, Red 13, Tifa, and Yuffie are the main characters with aerial combat ability. Beyond that, there are loads of new mechanical improvements for all. Blocking or dodging at the perfect moment, staggering enemies, and taking damage will reward you by filling a portion of your limit break gauge. It was challenging in Final Fantasy VII Remake to fill this gauge, but Rebirth rewards you much more for the objectives mentioned above. Obtaining a limit break now feels rewarding and deserved, but not impossible. You can earn your limit in most fights and utilize it to bash down foes. On the topic of limit breaks, each character can now unlock up to their level 3 limit breaks. This is all managed through the new Folio system, which functions similarly to the sphere grid found in Final Fantasy X. This system is genius, allowing for customization and new abilities to be unlocked by player choice, not story progression. Each time a character levels up, they will earn SP. Additionally, certain quest and minigame rewards can involve SP for specific characters. You can use this currency to obtain new skill cores on the folio, unlocking new synergy abilities and skills, stat boosts, and abilities. When you select a node to unlock, all connecting cores will be available to be learned after. You can also reset any skill core you'd like and recoup the SP you spent. When I had trouble deciding between what to unlock, I found myself testing synergy abilities and other skills and then using this feature to unlock something else and recoup the SP if I didn't like it. The combat system is nothing short of perfect. It is exceptional. I'm of the opinion that the Final Fantasy VII Remake battle system is one of the greatest modern fusions we've ever seen, perfectly mashing the strategy and action elements together seamlessly. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has picked up right where the first game left off, with incredible new additions and dozens of improvements. The addition of synergy mechanics has added more depth, and loads of improvements to the technical inner workings of aerial combat are much appreciated. In the end, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth managed to create my favorite battle system ever in a game. I've played hundreds and hundreds of hours of Rebirth since the game first came out last February, and I'm sure I'm going to spend a couple more 100 hours in the PC release. I've never once gotten tired of this combat system, and I feel like I can still tweak my playstyle and learn new ways to play 500 plus hours later. I really can't recall any other games having the ability to portray a combat system like that. While most of the combat encounters in Final Fantasy VII Remake were linear and scripted, the world is at your fingertips in Rebirth. Wild enemies roam each region all around, and you'll have to fight them if you get too close. Approaching wild enemies in each region will trigger a ring, where you'll get a nice boost of ATB to start the battle if you land first strike before the ring fills up. I never felt that there was an overabundance of enemies throughout the regions. It felt almost perfect with the ratio of enemies per area, allowing me to take in the sights and explore while still fighting enemies along the way. There are also a ton of new boss battles throughout the story. Multiple bosses from Final Fantasy VII Remake return to get another go at the party, and there are all kinds of new fiends and foes to take on throughout the world as well. Both combat and character designs for bosses are superb, recreating memorable fights with staggering fidelity and scale. Every single completely new boss fight never failed to make me smile, with all kinds of fun surprises awaiting throughout the story. Like Remake, I was so impressed with how intricate some of these fights were made to be. My fundamental understanding of the combat system was tested with certain fights, and I had a blast deepening my knowledge of each character's mechanics and toolkits. These battles also occur in tremendous set pieces that rival some of the best in the Final Fantasy series. It all connects just to how big Gaia is portrayed in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. When you're not roaming the world or fighting off enemies, it's easy to find yourself lost in the dozens of minigames you'll find throughout the world. The minigames are seriously incredible. It's all I can say. You can tell that the development team poured so much love into each of them, with all kinds of fun and wacky games to try. It's easy to spend hours playing through each one, and there are rewards for doing so too. Just ask Johnny. Each minigame has a hard mode that can be unlocked, allowing for new challenges once you reach the top rank. The hard versions of minigames are challenging, pushing your understanding of the game's mechanics and abilities to your limits. The biggest new minigame available in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is Queen's Blood, a new card game that is a blast to play. It's a card game and puzzle game combined. You play against a single opponent on a board with 3 rows. Cards require a certain amount of pawns to be placed and can leave different formations of pawns on the board for your next turn. Starting from your side, you build out your cards on the board by placing cards on spots with the corresponding number of pawns. It's incredibly strategic, requiring you to think critically before making each move. Throughout each region, you'll encounter new players whom you can challenge to a game of Queen's Blood. By defeating them, you can raise your Queen's Blood rank, which unlocks new challenges, cards, and much more. There are almost 150 cards to collect, so it's easy to devote hours to perfecting your understanding of this minigame. Just ask me. I've probably devoted at least 30 or 40 hours solely to playing Queen's Blood. I'm truthfully still blown away by just how deep this minigame can get. I'm still personally holding out for Square to release an online PvP version of the game at some point. Beyond Queen's Blood, there are almost 30 other minigames throughout the world to test your wits at. I was so impressed, and I still am, with just how many are packed into the world in each region. Each is so unique, offering a fun and refreshing break from the hunt for Sephiroth. Some of my favorites included Jump Frog, which feels like a nod to one of the stages from Fall Guys, and Dolphin Show, where I couldn't help myself from breaking out into a huge smile. There's even a few minigames that only appear on one quest, like the mushroom picking minigame in Gongaga. The piano minigame, of course, is also incredible. It's hard to believe a fully functioning piano is playable on a controller and inside a game like Final Fantasy. In the future, I hope Square considers adding more pieces of sheet music for players to play through, though I'm expecting that will likely be something we'll see in Part 3. Ultimately, I loved watching the characters be thrown into these wacky scenarios, which directly ties into one of the best aspects the developers have chosen to embrace in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth: its charm and wackiness. Truthfully, my favorite thing about Final Fantasy VII might just be the perfect clash of goofiness and seriousness that resonates throughout the entire game. It's a blend that, in my opinion, has yet to be matched in the RPG market, and is part of what makes the game so special for many. For a game that deals with serious themes such as life, loss, and environmentalism, it's so charming to experience some of the comedic elements you might find throughout Gaia. Final Fantasy VII Remake managed to capture this with hysterical moments in Wall Market like the Honeybee Inn and the Colosseum. Rebirth has elevated this to the next level, with so many lighthearted moments scattered throughout where all you can do is just laugh. Simple conversations between characters are an excellent example of this blend. After running from a Shinra soldier unit, the party ends up getting a chocobo at Bill's farm. Once captured, Aerith and Tifa poke fun at Cloud's hairstyle, stating he and the chocobo look kinda similar. This banter is consistent throughout the game between each of the party members, and it really is wonderful. There's a few moments with Yuffie in particular that I seriously still laugh about to this day. New and familiar events occur throughout the game that reflect this fun yet serious tone. Iconic moments like Barrett's sailor attire are recreated to perfection and truly bring out the charm that made the original title so fun. Each chapter offers so many fun and forever memorable moments. When you enter Corel Prison for the first time, Solemn Gus, formerly Mr. Coates in the original game, enters the room with a walkout song and dance. Everything about Kate Sith and the Golden Saucer is fun, witty, and truly out of this world. And let's not forget that Red 13 can somehow ride chocobos. The events that make this story so enjoyable and memorable are those that almost make you question how they're possible. Final Fantasy as a series has always sort of had this silly element twisted in with everything else. That's been somewhat lost in many of the more recent entries, but I couldn't be happier to see it thrive in the world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Amidst this world of wonder, charm, and wackiness, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is utterly gorgeous. Outright stunning at times, it builds greatly off of Final Fantasy VII Remake with welcome tweaks to character models and an uptick in visual fidelity. You'll immediately notice this in cutscenes with the hair on character models and the lighting. Rebirth is way more of a jump than I ever could have expected for visuals, somehow looking much improved from the already gorgeous Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. The cutscenes themselves are incredible once again. Cinematography and the use of camera movement shine, creating a premium look and feel to each scene. Paired with the PlayStation 5 DualSense and its haptic feedback, it's hard to describe just how immersive some of these scenes can be. And seeing the camera pan directly from a cutscene to the character model is a feeling that will never get old. I touched on earlier just how stunning some of these locations are throughout the game. Even the quieter areas are filled with wonders as far as the eye can see. Running through the wilderness, you'll encounter animals like deer or rabbits who will react to Cloud and the party passing by. Little details like this exist everywhere and encapsulate what an immersive experience this is. I cannot even begin to describe just how much better Rebirth looks on PC. As someone who was blown away with the game's visuals on PlayStation 5, it feels like we've jumped to PS6. The lighting changes are immediately noticeable, and even in scenes where it isn't very prominent, you can still tell a difference when looking between PS5 and PC. This new lighting system looks ethereal at times, especially during cutscenes. Areas like Mithril Cave have so much more ambience with the improved system, now creating more shadows and light bounce off of the characters in a darker environment. Strolling the jungles of Gingaga has never been better either, as you might expect. For the most part, I played at 1440p resolution with DLSS quality enabled, which was greatly satisfying and a perfect experience. Each city and region is filled with rich detail, which made this PC release almost feel like a whole new game. I loved playing through each chapter and seeing the upgrade in real time. With the available customization of graphics options, even running the game on medium settings will bolster some graphical improvements from PS5. Pop-in is something that was pretty widely seen in the PlayStation 5 version of the game, and understandably so. Loading in that many high-quality graphical assets is no joke, and the PS5 has a limit, as all consoles do. On the PC release, that issue is mostly gone if you have a quick SSD that the game is installed on. Cards with higher VRAM can possibly help with this too, but in my experience, I had little to no pop-in, and the greenery that did was barely noticeable. Gone are the days of entire shrubs appearing out of nowhere as you run up to them. Though I will say, I think if you have a slower SSD in your system, it's likely you still will experience some pop-in. That speed is really important for this. I also want to comment on the mouse and keyboard support, as the game feels much better than I expected it to. I played a bit of Final Fantasy VII Remake on keyboard and mouse for fun really when the game came to Steam, but this feels much tighter and better overall. Still, play the game on a controller, in a DualSense preferably. DualSense haptic feedback and adaptive triggers are supported, so you can get that full console experience but with better everything on PC. There is some impressive and fun tech to mess around with as you explore each location in the game. Similar to cones and fences in Final Fantasy VII Remake, loads of movable objects will now fall or scatter when you run through them. Costa del Sol has all kinds of chairs and tables that you can knock over, and so do a majority of the main points of interest throughout the game. This can lead to funny scenarios during in-game cutscenes, as those objects will be moved as well. Another fun find of mine was in each area that had the black robes walking toward their next destination. Even if you're not near them, they will continue walking to their location and arrive there. I tested this multiple times, especially in Nibelheim, and was extremely impressed with the overall attention to detail. Besides the astounding visuals, the penultimate feature of Rebirth's presentation is the magnificent soundtrack you'll experience. Masashi Hamazu, Mitsuto Suzuki, and each of the wonderful composers and arrangers on this project have produced what is one of the greatest video game soundtracks in recent memory, and perhaps of all time. I adored the themes and music found in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but Rebirth has taken everything so great about that original soundtrack and turned it up to 11. And in my opinion, that says a lot, considering the composers were able to create 8 CDs worth of incredible music for just one city, Midgar. It all starts with the main theme of Final Fantasy VII, one of the most remarkable tracks of music ever created for a game. Throughout each area, this theme reappears constantly with different instrumentation, style, tempo, and so much more. The Grasslands features a more lyrical version of the main theme, relying heavily on orchestra and strings. However, as soon as you go into battle, a bombastic version of the main theme enters, filled with a brass-led melody. Beyond this, each region has its own version of the main theme, and subsequently a battle edit of that version. Cosmo Canyon utilizes softer percussion to create that desert feel as you roam the lands. The Gold Saucer has high techno versions of the main theme in certain minigames. Overall, this use of the main theme is a masterclass example of utilizing music and orchestration for world building. The music tells a story about each region of the world and the type of experiences they offer. The sheer complexity of some of these tracks is insane. There's no other word for it. It is instantly noticeable with the Materia Guardian fight in Chapter 1, with a theme that clashes Let the Battles Begin with One-Winged Angel. Hearing this while fighting this giant Materia monster next to Sephiroth was thrilling. There's also the Final Fantasy VII main theme battle edit, which I've still been playing on repeat ever since the soundtrack released. During the game, I loved hearing instruments like the accordion be leaned on for themes like On Our Way and Calm. It's a unique feel that adds that additional layer of immersion you don't find in every game. Like characters, tens of tracks from Final Fantasy VII Remake have made their way over to the sequel in places you might not expect. You might select a random quest and fight monsters to the fan-favorite High Five battle theme on a beach, and that's just the beginning. More obscure and location-based themes, like Wall Market, also show up around the world. Combined with the hundreds and hundreds of new tracks, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth offers one of the greatest soundtracks you'll ever hear in a game, and anything for that regard. There's so much variety, it's almost a miracle that this soundtrack exists. The music ultimately ties together everything that makes Rebirth so memorable: emotion. Emotion lies at the very core of this story. The original game had a way with words and animations, crafting unthinkable moments of emotion that were challenging to pull off at the time of release. Now, with gorgeous 4K visuals, impeccable voice acting, and expressive dynamic character models, emotion is a constant force in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that shines everywhere. I'd argue that emotion is one of the hardest things to create in games for a wide collective audience. Personally, while I've connected with countless titles throughout my years of playing games, only a few have ever deeply connected with me on a level that brought outward emotion. Rebirth is one of those. Parts of this game are truthfully indescribable. I've never been so overcome with emotion, at times finding myself smiling like a child and others practically sobbing. By far, this is largely due to the immaculate voice acting in the game. Smaller scenes even have the ability to leave such an impact with vulnerable conversations between the characters. There are dozens and dozens of emotional moments on both ends of the scale that would not have evoked anything for me without the voice acting. This cast has elevated the characters to the point where they feel like real people. Too many times, I sat speechless, watching the events on screen unfold with the sensational voice cast and celestial music creating something beautiful. If I could, I'd list every single voice actor in this game that made Rebirth possible. Whether antagonist, protagonist, party member, or even side character, each and every character is brought to life through their voice actor, enriching the world to new heights. With just how expressive each character is, it feels like you're watching a movie at times. You're experiencing this heartfelt journey right next to all of the characters, through their ups, downs, and the roller coaster in between. So, let's talk performance. I spent quite some time working through various setting combinations that best fit my PC, and I arrived with only a few changes here and there. For reference, my system is powered by an Intel i11700KF, 32GB of DDR4 RAM at 3600MHz, and an RTX 3060 Ti. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was installed on an NVMe SSD. Even coming from Final Fantasy VII Remake on PC, I am very impressed with how well the game runs. Square Enix clearly designed the port around accommodating as many systems as possible, and that's a huge benefit for such a diverse market. Even with my somewhat dated system that I'm very ready to upgrade, I was able to average well into the 70s and 80s with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at 1440p. Before I dive into my thoughts on the settings and where tweaks were needed for my build, I want to break down what you should expect walking into this port. Being a game made in Unreal Engine 4, VRAM is a resource Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is hungry for. If you have a GPU with 8GB of VRAM like myself, you are going to have to make a few compromises to run it at 1440p. It's nothing crazy or deal-breaking, but this is something you need to keep in mind. Breaking down my settings, I managed to run the game at 1440p with minimal compromise. The screen resolution is grayed out, but you can change this by switching between borderless full screen and windowed for display mode. Frame rate I have set to 120 FPS, even though I won't hit that high, as I noticed there was a slight stutter if your system was hitting the cap. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth offers 3 different graphics quality presets: low, medium, and high. To be honest, I think while these are fine, very few systems will be able to run the presets as intended to maximize performance. You should be customizing your settings to squeeze every single bit of performance out of your system. The biggest place to do so is by far dynamic resolution scaling. On each of the presets, this is set to a minimum of 50%, which is equivalent to DLSS performance. Raising this to 66% will give you DLSS quality, 100% gives you essentially DLAA, while 33% offers ultra performance. This area of dynamic res scaling in DLSS is one I've seen many people online confused about. Instead of offering basic preset options like performance, quality, or ultra performance, the development team has opted to allow players to customize the dynamic resolution scale as they please. There are two sides to this decision. On one hand, I think the flexibility in customization allowed by letting players pick their preferred dynamic resolution is fantastic, as you can tune that dynamic res to fit in line with your setup. However, I believe this will naturally confuse those who aren't very familiar with major settings customization or the language around things like DLSS or dynamic resolution. I've already seen plenty of comments online regarding this implementation, with some players even claiming the game does not support DLSS at all. I promise you, it does. You just need to use the dynamic resolution. I also think with the customization of changing the dynamic resolution floor, a full slider of 0 to 100% would have been nice. This way, in theory, you should be able to tweak the sampling in between what we would consider DLSS performance and quality. Moving on in our settings, background model detail is one you should pay close attention to. While running Ultra is certainly possible on my build, I chose to go with High to maintain better performance. The details between High and Ultra are far less noticeable than the jump from Low to Medium, so you shouldn't have to worry about breaking any immersion in the game or anything like that. If you try out this setting, I encourage you to look around the grasslands or a big open area with Low and Medium because you're going to be blown away with how much is cut out. Ocean detail, character model detail, and effect details I left at High as there was not really any noticeable bump in performance otherwise. Ocean detail changes the topography of the oceans and how complex they look from above, which does not do much considering you're not near an ocean for a large part of the game. Character model detail is one I really struggled to notice a difference between, as both settings looked pretty identical in my testing. Maybe it's just me, but I really didn't see much here. As for effect details, this involves the particle effects you see with each attack and elsewhere in the world, such as Lifestream. Setting this on low effectively slices the number of particles in half, but I do not think this is something worth tweaking unless your CPU is a little bit older and every frame matters. Here comes the big one, texture resolution. Remember how I mentioned the compromises you'll need to make do with 8GB VRAM GPUs? This is the setting. I was able to run the game fine with texture resolution set to high, but the frame rate was far too inconsistent for my liking. I think if you were to target 30 FPS, you would be more than okay, but I spent over 200 hours in quality mode on PS5. I'm sticking with 60 FPS. The change between each setting here is certainly noticeable, but I think between medium and high is not that big of a deal. The game is still beautiful, and none of the character models suffer from the lower resolution, mainly just objects in the environment. Finally, rounding out our last few settings, shadow and fog quality both allow you to tweak the environment additives and save performance. Fog is something that appears in some areas throughout Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I think turning it to low is well worth it. In my testing, there was a noticeable performance bump when switching to low. As for shadows, I don't feel like this setting does anything right now. I'm not sure if it's bugged, but I do not believe this is working as intended. Shadows look the same regardless of quality, and the resolution does not change on them. I've already gone over DLSS, but you need to enable this to access the performance boost associated with it. And as for characters displayed and character shadow display distance, neither of these really made a noticeable impact on performance for me. In the end, I'm managing to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on my PC at 1440p in the 60 to 80 frames per second range, and this is with most settings at max. My customized settings made it possible, and I once again encourage you to tweak beyond the preset to squeeze every bit of performance out of your system. There are some players online reporting crashes, errors, and more, but in my experience, I ran into none of these. The only technical error I found while playing was a camera stutter when turning from side to side, and this was fixed on my end by lowering texture resolution to release some VRAM. I have to say, I'm overall very satisfied with this PC port, and while there are still some areas I'd like to see addressed in the settings like ultrawide support, I think this has to be Square's best PC port yet. It's made to run on as many systems as possible, and even at 1080p, I think you're bound to have an unbelievable time with a game as good as this one. This game would not have been the same without the bold decision to take the remake project in a route of reimagination. With a standard remake, story events are set in stone. You know what to expect, when it will happen, and where it will occur. That couldn't be further from the truth with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. While still visiting the iconic locations from the original, so many new and exciting story beats occurred throughout the narrative that had me on the edge of my seat. I was constantly wondering what would come next and just how the title would differ from the original. The ability to offer Rebirth as a new experience for both new and longtime players is magical. There's no other word for it. Even the excitement and discussion behind the game wouldn't be anywhere near what it is now. New stories await, being ones that would not have been possible otherwise. Though some might find that disappointing, I believe it's the greatest gift of this remake project. This approach allows players who have long experienced the original game, like myself, to fall in love all over again with the world and characters we've loved for so long, and that is a pure work of art. I can undoubtedly say that Rebirth solidifies the Final Fantasy VII Remake project as the most ambitious remake ever created. I do not think we will ever see a remake of this caliber again. I believe that the improvements we've seen in Rebirth were only possible thanks to the approach of 3 separate titles, allowing Square Enix to gain confidence and implement new tweaks in each new entry. Rebirth embraces everything that made the original Final Fantasy VII so special, while adding a plethora of new and exciting content that feels like it should have been there all along. It's truly a love letter to what made the original game so iconic, embracing the wackiness and silliness of the original game and blending it all together effortlessly with the incredibly serious themes throughout. We all knew this game was going to be special, but it's more than anything I ever could have imagined. I knew the second I rolled credits last February, and I still feel this now. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is one of the greatest RPGs and video games ever created. I've spent over 500 hours just playing Rebirth, and I'm probably going to double that at least by the time Part 3 is out. It's bigger, bolder, and brighter than almost any game I've played over the last decade. I spent 340 hours working toward the Platinum Trophy on PlayStation 5, and I can't wait to do it all over again with this Steam release. Additionally, seeing all the theories, retrospectives, and analysis over the last year for Rebirth has been inspiring. It's so wonderful to see Final Fantasy VII talked about so much, with everyone having their own interpretation here or there. And I'd be willing to bet that that's only going to ramp up as we head closer and closer to the last title in this trilogy. Rebirth has set a grand stage for Part 3 of the remake project. It's sure to be filled with all kinds of fascinating twists, loads of drama and emotion, and of course, all the locations we've yet to visit. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the kind of title you don't forget. It's one you carry with you through your experiences, emotions, and lessons. Very few games have had such a profound impact on my life, yet I can say with the utmost confidence that Rebirth is an experience I'll never forget. It's turned a special story into something even grander, elevating the source material to new heights. The final chapter of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is my most anticipated game ever, and that's for good reason. This final title will tie up what will ultimately be a decade-long journey to recreate one of the medium's greatest titles. And I, for one, couldn't be more ecstatic to see what awaits at Journey's End. Final Weapon is giving Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PC a 5 out of 5. Square Enix provided Final Weapon with a PC copy of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for review purposes.